Hey guys, welcome to Fossil 21 Gaming. Today we're taking a look at the Callisto Protocol. If you guys are new to the channel, do me a solid, subscribe to the channel, like the video, and let's get on with the Callisto Protocol. I, like many others, was super excited hearing about the Callisto Protocol. I've never actually played any of the Dead Space games, but I've heard a lot of good things about them. And so when I heard that a lot of the people that have made the original Dead Space game were making the Callisto Protocol, I was super pumped for it. I'm a big fan of the horror genre. I love the Resident Evil games, and I'm actually super excited for the Dead Space remake coming out in January. Spoilers ahead for anyone that hasn't beaten the game just yet. We will be talking about spoilers with the story, gameplay, things like that. So here's your warning. Without further ado, let's jump into the story for the Callisto Protocol. You play as Jacob, a transporter who's transporting, I believe, medical supplies to a prison called Black Iron on the moon Callisto, one of Jupiter's moons. Your ship gets hijacked by these terrorists, and because they're trying to take over the ship, it ultimately ends up with you crash landing on Callisto. The main prison guard dude shows up with a bunch of robots, and they arrest the terrorist, and then the warden calls them and was like, yep, arrest him too. So you also get arrested, which kind of gets answered later in the story, because at first I was like, why are they arresting you? Like, it literally doesn't make any sense. They throw you in the prison, and next thing you wake up, you're in the prison cell, and the whole prison is just going to chaos. There's, the fire's going, the robots are destroyed, like something is going on. You have no idea what just happened. And then the next thing you know, there's friggin' zombie type things running around everywhere. As you progress through the story, you discover that the prison itself was more or less just a means to fund test subjects for this crazy stuff that they're doing. The warden and the scientists are trying to progress the human race, trying to evolve the human race, and they're using all these prisoners as test subjects. Which kind of goes back to the whole reason why the warden just arrested you anyway. Yeah, you weren't supposed to be there, but he's like, it's just one more test subject, come on in. So the warden is pretty much cool with all these zombies running around in Callisto in space, because it's supposed to further the human race, supposed to evolve the human race. At least that's what he's hoping. And yeah, that's more or less the gist of the story. I mean, there's a few more fine details to it, but the gist of the story is that. And honestly, I thought the story was pretty good. It's, I don't know, it kind of reminds me of some of the other horror games, which kind of is annoying because I see a lot of people really hating, like, oh, the story's not very good. And I'm like, I don't know, maybe it's just me, but I remember playing Resident Evil 2, the remake, and I had no idea what's going on. You're literally just a cop that has no idea what's going on, and yeah, you discover little bits and pieces here, but I don't know what's the overall arching story is. I mean, yes, they have a whole chain of Resident Evil games that explain that to you, so it just, I don't know, it just doesn't make sense to really hate on the game, especially when it's the first, because maybe the second one or the third one, and we'll look back and be like, yes, this story was awesome. I don't know, I personally, it's a horror game. The story doesn't have to be super in-depth. I'm playing the game for the horror elements, for the zombies, for the monsters, you know what I mean? I also saw a lot of people kind of hating on it because it wasn't like, I don't know, maybe if they're hoping that it would be more like the original Dead Space, and of course it has its elements there, for sure, but maybe they were just hoping that it would be better than Dead Space, and like I said, I've never played Dead Space, so I can't give my opinion on it, but it almost sounds like it wasn't as good as the original Dead Space, and so maybe that's why people hate on it. I don't know. For what I got, since I haven't played any of the other games, I thought the game was awesome. One thing I do have to agree with for most of the criticism that I'm seeing with the game as a whole is that the game wasn't super scary. And don't get me wrong, there was a lot of real tense moments in this game, but I felt like because the game gave you so much more resources, whether it's ammo, health, what have you, that I didn't feel as, I guess, stressed going into certain situations. For example, like I mentioned Resident Evil 2, there's times where I only had 3 bullets, 1 shotgun shell, and that was pretty much it. You see what I'm saying? But here, I always had a ton of ammo. Got a lot more resources, and just, I don't know, the enemies give you a lot more resources as well. And so, like, I always felt prepared for whatever was happening because I just had the equipment to take care of it. Speaking of which, let's jump right into the gameplay. The combat here is a mix of melee combat and weapons. After breaking out of your cell, you first get a pickaxe, or like an axe type thing. You only have it for a little bit, and then you quickly get the electric baton, which is what you'll have for the most of the game. That's what you'll upgrade. You also get access to a bunch of other weapons as you progress through the story. You get a pistol, you get, you know, a mini shotgun, an actual shotgun, and different pistols, things like that. So you get, I believe you get like 5 or 6 total weapons. I think 5. Count it, 6 counting the baton. From all the way from a pistol to literally an assault rifle. My favorite weapons actually was probably the starting out pistol, that it's fully upgraded, just because I really liked its secondary ability where it holds 10 rounds, and you can do the R1 and it'll do basically all the bullets will shoot out and they'll explode, insta killing most enemies. So I really like that. And then I use the skunk gun. It's like the mini shotgun. It holds 4 rounds. I really like that one. It was really good for blowing off limbs. And then of the riot gun, actually all of them were pretty good. I used them all for specific things. I tried to save my riot gun and my assault rifle for the big boys, just because that was my more powerful weapons. All of the weapons, including the baton, are upgradable, and I really loved like the 3D printer thing. It was really cool, and all the guns, I loved how it 3D printed. All super cool. One of the other things you get access to is the GRP. I called it just the grip, just because it grabs things. I don't know if the game actually calls it that, but it's the GRP. And that's totally upgradable. It's got 3 different paths you can upgrade, but you can also upgrade all 3 if you wanted to. I didn't get enough resources to do so, but I upgraded one whole bar where you can literally like grab somebody and chuck them as hard as you could at walls, and sometimes it would just straight up kill enemies. So the grip was really cool. I loved picking them up, throwing them into enemies or into fans and stuff like that. The grip was a lot of fun. The game has a dodge mechanic that is kind of unique. Instead of your traditional push X or push circle for a lot of games that I've played to dodge, this one you have to hold left or right on the joystick before the enemy hits. So if you see them about to swing right, you'll hold it left. Things like that. It was a little bit tricky, if I'm going to be honest, and I just did not jive with it. For the first probably like 2-ish hours, it was odd to me. Like the whole like controller layout is just very strange. But like I said, the whole dodging did take me a little bit. But honestly, after the first 2 hours, I clicked with it. It was not hard to master at all. I mastered the controls, and so whenever something came at me, I was fairly good for the most part of avoiding attacks. I also forgot to mention holding back on the analog also does your block kind of thing. So this kind of goes in with the difficulty too. I felt like the first couple hours I thought the game was pretty difficult, but once I mastered the controls, like I was saying, it got a whole lot easier. Talking about the enemies, I thought all the enemies looked pretty dang cool. They all looked freaking scary. My only real negative with the enemies is that a lot of them were just freaking meat sponges. Like if I didn't have any ammo, I felt like I was beating them with the baton forever. It was like 10 hits before I actually took somebody down. Even longer if they get the little tentacles out and all of a sudden they evolved, or if you had one that had armor on. Like, oh my gosh, took me so many hits if I didn't have ammo. Thankfully, like I said, the game gives you so much resources that didn't happen too often. It was more in the early game more than it was in the late game. I mentioned this just a second ago, but some of the cool enemies were later in the game. They start to sprout these tentacles after you've pretty much killed them, and if you don't take them out fast enough, they'll evolve and come back as even stronger enemies, and they take even more hits to take down, whether it's with your baton or weapons. And so that's really cool. I also think that the game had a decent variety of enemies. You had like your standard enemies. You had ones that had like the guard armor on, because they're all like prisoners and guards. So some of them actually had full on armor on. And so that like hitting him in the head or shooting him in the head didn't really work. You had to kind of dismember them and take them out. Some enemies literally turned completely invisible, so that was cool. And then there's ones that I would consider closer to like the clickers from Last of Us, where they're blind, they can't see, but they hear sound, and they're extremely tough to take out. But if you stealth kill them all, that you can kill them all in one hit. So it's kind of like the caveat. If you want to go in guns blazing, it's tough because they immediately evolve and take on a ton of hits, and usually there's a bunch in a row, so it's never just like one. I mentioned this a moment ago, but one of my favorite things in this game was the dismemberment. I thought it was awesome. You had an enemy chasing you, you can blow off its legs, and all of a sudden it falls down, and now it's, you know, crawling to you, or you can blow off its arms. Like, you can actually blow off any appendage. Like, there's even times where I blew their head off, and they're still chasing me, and they got, like, the tentacles all coming out. I love the dismemberment. It was fun, especially when you take out the legs and you can bash them in with the baton. I also... I haven't really talked about this yet, but the death animations, there are so many death animations in this game. Like, it is crazy. Like, I heard people talking about it before, but holy cow, there's so many different ways. Like, get sucked into a fan, or get too close to something and get, you know, blown up, or like just the enemy grabs you and bashes your face. Like, just depending on what enemy's attacking you and where you're at, like, it's a totally different animation. Yeah, overall, I thought the enemies were pretty good. There's a lot of jump scares. I would say that there's a lot of jump scares. Some of them weren't necessarily scary, but like I said, the game still had its tense moments, but I just feel like that because of the amount of resources you got, it made it less tense, if that makes sense. Up next, I want to talk about the levels. Every level in Callisto Protocol looks absolutely amazing. I loved every single place that I went to. Every single, like, the greenhouse dome to underground into, like, this underground, like, city part that the prison was built on. Like, just all the levels looked absolutely awesome. And yeah, for the most part, the levels themselves were fairly linear. I did notice that at the beginning of the game, there were a few more, like, I would say branching paths, but they really weren't. They just branched out, and usually there was a chest down there or a tough enemy that when you killed them dropped, you know, pristine item or something like that. I didn't really see those branching paths as much unless I just missed them in the late game. Yeah, overall, I thought the levels were great. I thought all the enemy placement was good. There are some parts where I thought, I'm like, oh, here comes the jump scare, and then it never came, and then like 5 minutes later something else would jump out at me when I least expected it. So overall, I thought the levels were great. I do want to touch a little bit here on the music before we move on. The music and sound design I thought were awesome. From where you're walking down the hallway and you can hear the zombies, especially with 3D audio. This is a game that I would highly recommend to play with a headset because you can hear, like, the 3D audio works awesome here. Sound design and music, top notch here. Up next, I do want to talk about the bosses. So first off, I was a little disappointed with the bosses. Not that the bosses were bad, but just the lack of bosses. There's only 2, I would say maybe 3-ish different bosses. The first one, I don't know if it's considered a boss or not, is a robot. You just take him out by shooting him in the head 3 times. And I don't know, like I said, I don't know if that one's necessarily a boss. He does pretty much insta-kill you if you don't shoot his head off. Only reason I thought it was a boss is because you get a trophy for killing it, so... And the second one is the 2-head, which the 2-head itself was pretty fun. I did enjoy the boss. Most of them are kind of meat spongy, along with all of the other enemies. And then the final boss is actually really fun. I super enjoyed the final boss. It's the main prison guard kind of, because he's infected, morphs into this giant freaking crazy monster dude. And the only problem is there's a few other boss fights, but they're all the 2-head over and over again. I think you fight the 2-head 2 or 3 more times. I just wish that there was a lot more variety. Like those 2 to 3 2-head bosses, they could have swapped with something else, introduced somebody else. Like, it didn't have to be the same type of boss over and over again, if that makes sense. Like, I don't know. I just felt like it was kind of cheap. I don't know. I just wish that there was more variety between basically the 2 main bosses. Up next, let's talk about the performance. I played the Callisto Protocol on a PlayStation 5, and from what I've heard, that was the best choice because the game just did not run well on PC or Xbox, I believe. I don't know if it's been fixed now. I know it's been about a week-ish since that. But as far as PlayStation 5 goes, I had very little issues for the most part. The game looked absolutely amazing. I had a few frame drops here and there, but they're more in the late game. Overall, I thought the performance was fine. I didn't run into any game-breaking issues, I'd say. And overall, the game looked absolutely amazing. Like, the facial animations literally looked so good. Like, I can't think of another game that had like that looks this good. Like, yeah, Horizon Forbidden West looks pretty good, but like just like their facial, like the facial animations in this game were looked like the real people. Like, it was so good. Just overall, the visuals for this game were just top notch. The game had a ton of other issues, but as far as looking good, this game was not slacking in that department. All right, let's go with my final thoughts. Overall, I had a blast with the Callisto Protocol. I just don't really understand why people are hating on it so much. Yeah, it's not quite as good as Dead Space, so I've heard. And the combat is a little bit challenging at first, but I don't know. After like the first couple hours, the game kind of clicked, and I was having a good time. I thought the enemies were a lot of fun. I thought that all the weapons were cool, and they looked cool, and they felt cool like shooting them. Like I said, I think the lack of bosses was definitely a negative in my opinion, recycling that same boss over and over again. But the two different bosses that we got, I thought were pretty good. Especially that last boss was a lot of fun. And then just like the whole levels just had a bunch of spikes and turbines and fans to throw things in. And it was, I don't know, I just had a lot of fun with the game. I loved the dismemberment here. That was a lot of fun. And overall, because of all these things, I think I would give the Callisto Protocol an 8 out of 10. Like I said, I've never played any of the Dead Space games, so maybe that's why, you know, a lot more people are harsher on it. But for me, who's never played any of them, I had a blast. And if anything, this made me more excited for what these guys do next for their next game, and even more excited for the Dead Space remake that comes out in January. Like, I'm even more hyped for that if people are saying that that one was better than this one. Like, I'm just excited. And that's going to be it, guys. Like I said, I had a blast with the game. Let me know down in the comments below what you guys thought of the Callisto Protocol. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we'll catch you guys on the next video.